After many controversies that the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs should be scrapped, President Bola Tinubu appointed Abubakar Momoh as the minister in charge. Now, the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs was created on September the 10th, 2008 to promote and coordinate policies for the development, peace and security of the Niger Delta region. And with the new minister on board, he is expected to coordinate efforts to tackle the challenges of infrastructural development as well as environment protection and youth empowerment in the Niger Delta region. Joining us via Zoom from Bayelsa to discuss more on the task ahead for the new minister is the former head of Reintegration Presidential Amnesty Program, Alfred Kimipado. It's good to have you join us again on TVC Breakfast. You're welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
All right. So if you followed the introduction, the Ministry of Niger Delta had been, created since 2008. And, if you also saw the controversies that played out before a new minister was announced, of course, you recall it was initially skipped or not mentioned. There was no mention of Niger Delta Affairs Minister, but after the back and forth, we now have a minister. But if you could even weigh the value of the Niger Delta Affairs Ministry, how would you quantify it? How useful has it been in serving out its mandate?
To say the truth this morning, I really can't measure how useful that Niger Delta Ministry has been to the people of the Niger Delta. That does not mean that it cannot be useful. I'll give you an example. In the 2023 budget, the Ministry of Niger Delta has a budgetary provision of about, I think, 100 billion, while the Niger Delta Development Commission, the NDDC, has a budgetary provision of about 876 billion. So, in the past, it looks as if the Ministry of Niger Delta was made to supervise the NDDCs. So you begin to ask questions like a ministry of about 100 billion naira budget made to supervise a commission of about 876 billion. So it doesn't really add up. So it only gave out a situation where the minister and probably the ministry jumped out of its official duties to begin to poke nose into the activities of the Niger Delta Development Commission, and a lot of unexpected, undesired outcomes was what we had, and that's not the bet. Going into why you really asked the question, the Ministry of Niger Delta was actually set up by law to attend to the issues of the Niger Delta. And you can't say that without going back to the Niger Delta Recovery Plan. The Niger Delta Recovery Plan has about 5 or 6 legs. One of it is the infrastructural development components, which is what the Ministry of Niger Delta and the NDDC is supposed to focus on. Another leg of the Niger Delta Recovery Plan is the environmental remediation component of the Niger Delta because of the pollution in the Niger Delta. It's a littoral environment, the pollution of the Niger Delta, and pollution as a result of oil exploitation and exploration activities, how the Niger Delta can be cleaned so that other ventures such as agriculture and other things can prosper. That's the second leg. And that's why you have organizations such as the HIPREP that started in Ogoniland. It's supposed to start in Ogoniland and move on to other parts of the Niger Delta for a cleaner Niger Delta, not only for agriculture, but most importantly, these attendant consequences of oil exploration leaves behind illnesses, diseases and environments that causes. So that's what it's supposed to attend to. Then you have a third leg. A third leg, you talk about the petroleum assets redistribution, for which we had the Petroleum Industry Bill that subsequently became an act. That is supposed to address the issues of community participations, especially participation of indigenous and oil-producing communities in the process of the oil exploration and the processes of working in that industry. For example, today we are talking about the protection of pipelines and other related materials. So if the communities were sufficiently involved in however their skills may have provided in these processes, then we will talk less about the protection of these pipelines, because instead of busting the pipelines, these communities would have been involved in the processes of refining this oil and whatnot. So that's the third leg. You also have the fourth leg of the Niger Delta Recovery Plan. The fourth leg of the Niger Delta Recovery Plan talked about the general security of oil facilities in the Niger Delta, so that Niger Deltas will not just participate in this space, but they will also, on behalf of the federal government, give this security to the oil assets, so that, of course, the oil will continue to produce. And of course, you know that till tomorrow, as we speak in this country, oil is the mainstay. Subsidy, no subsidy, crude oil go up, come down midway. It's all about oil, so we can't deny that. We just need to leverage on that to see how. Then the fifth leg of the Niger Delta Recovery Plan, if you listen to me carefully, is now the amnesty program, for which I was head of reintegration. So the amnesty program, of all the other legs of the Niger Delta Recovery Plan, the amnesty program is the only thing that was not requested by the people of the Niger Delta. The people of the Niger Delta requested these other four things, which is infrastructural development, for which all are stated is environmental remediation, their involvement in the petroleum activities. So the amnesty program was like the federal government saying, okay, as a result of this request, there is so much fight and there is so much, unforeseen activities in the Niger Delta, which led to the militancy and other things. So the federal government was like, okay, you hold on. Let us grant you amnesty. Leave your camps, which is the demobilization. Put down your guns, which is the disarmament. Then we will now reintegrate you. So the process of reintegration was to ensure that militants are de-radicalized, and not only are they de-radicalized, they are not trained to fit the purpose.
Yeah.
And not only the ex-militants, but also members of the impacted community are trained to fit into purpose. Not trained for the purpose of training, but trained in relevant areas.
Yeah.
So when you now ask what happens today, the question will now be, how much of this understanding as a federal government, through its Ministry of Niger Delta and other related agencies, been able to, put all of these together? I can tell you that it's not been perfect, because if it's been perfect, the results we see in the Niger Delta today would have been different. Oil would not have gone down the way it is. Some forms of militancy wouldn't have been the way it is still now. And there wouldn't have still been the desire to still mop up arms, because I can confirm to you that there are still a lot of arms in Niger Delta. So in Tinubu's administration going forward, if you ask me, it's for the president and commander-in-chief to see how he can recalibrate these components of the Niger Delta, probably directly from his office, from somebody who really understands these issues, and not somebody who just understands these issues from Abuja, but somebody who is on ground here, who is in touch, who understands the culture of the people here. When I talk about culture of the people, I'm not talking about dance and drama. I'm talking about the attitudes, the belief systems, the appreciation of work, the way they approach global issues. How do they localize these global issues, and how to re-engage the culture of the people to understand that whatever you are doing, there's a global perspective to the whole issue. So, for example, people need to be the old youth population here has to be reappraised. When you were making your
right,
intro,
Mr. Kemepado,
you see, in all my
Yeah,
Go on.
I can see because the Niger Delta has a lot of issues, and quite appreciably you mentioned a lot of them. But then I would like you to speak to the reports on the first newspaper this morning, where they said that about the oil pipeline contract extension, where the Niger Delta groups battle Tompolo as Isoko Yoruba groups threaten violent shutdown, one of impending bloodbath in the creeks. Nobody wants to hear about bloodbath. Could you speak to what is happening? Because you talked about the security, issues around the Niger Delta. So could you speak to these particular reactions that, the people of the Niger Delta, Yoruba groups, and the Isoko, who are threatening fire and brimstone?
You see, let me also tell you this thing. As not just somebody who was an administrator in the amnesty office, but I say some of these irrelevant or necessary threats are just empty threats. I say this. I'm not saying this to undermine the arguments that if there are issues to be reviewed and looked at in the Tantita's contract, that it shouldn't be attended to. Of course, I agree that every security is local. So if there are issues such as the review of the Tantita or the Tompolo's contract to see how the areas where the pipelines have come through, that there should be more involvement of people, there should be more involvement of local people, there should be more spread of the old contract. I'm not against all of these arguments, but let me also tell you, and let me also take this advantage to tell the federal government, because I am a practitioner, that Tompolo is not somebody that should be underrated in the Niger Delta. I'm not on his payroll. I'm not part of his Tantita stuff. But I'm telling you, blunt truth, underrated. The work he has done so far should be commended and should be appreciated to that extent. However, in trying to get that work better, if people feel, if there are valid arguments to the extent that, okay, the terms of the contract and the modus operandi of the contract should be renegotiated to serve the federal government better, that's fine. But you see, let me also tell you this. Over time, probably because of the poverty here in the Niger Delta and the oppression and the suppression, anonymous groups and different sets of people in the Niger Delta have learned the habits of trying to see violence and threats as a first instrument of engagement. And I kept telling them while I was in the amnesty office, for those I could deal with, I tell to them that your first line of engagement is negotiation, lobbying, making friends. Try and give what you see. This issue of threats, at the drop of a hat, threats, at the drop of a hat, block East-West Road, at the drop of a hat, you are threatening the federal government. Is one of the things that the federal
hello, Mr. Kemekpado, can you hear us? All right, let us try to reconnect with Kemekpado. There are, analysts at this time, and as you noted, Ibrahim, a lot of issues, were revealed or reiterated in our engagement with Mr. Kemekpado so far, and of course, that question you were asking. All right, we understand that you are back. We lost connectivity with you, Mr. Kemekpado, at the time. Please carry on.
Yeah, what I was saying is that one of the things the federal government must go away with is the federal government must not give oxygen to unnecessary threats in the Niger Delta, because some of these threats are baseless. As a matter of fact, they make the Niger Delta, they feed the negative reports about the Niger Delta. Maybe I just tell you the truth. Some of these threats are just some two boys who have not been able to even transport themselves to the bus stop, sitting down in the room somewhere and issuing threats. You are issuing threat to Tompolo, or you are issuing threat to Asare, or you are issuing threat to Boilov or Ateketon. Who are you? I'm not saying that anybody should be underrated, okay? I'm here. I'm talking to you from Port Harcourt. So it's not like I'm one.
Okay, okay. Well, no.
However,
Alfred,
if there are issues that need to be negotiated, it can be renegotiated so that the federal government can have a better deal with respect to the protection of pipelines, with respect to the flow of oil facilities. But don't give those kind of attentions.
Alfred Kemekpado, there have been forth and back about who has been responsible for theft of crude oil in the Niger Delta. We've got Tantita.
All stakeholders,
which had been. No, I want you to expatiate on that. But then saying that the Nigerian Army are the one responsible, and Nigerian Army said that it is the NSCDC or it is Tantita and all of that. So there had been forth and back. Could you expatiate on this? What exactly is the problem, and how do you think the president can solve this once and for all?
Let me tell you something. To start with, okay, the Nigerian Army or the Nigerian Armed Forces, such as the Army and the Navy, especially when it comes to crude oil and maybe the NSCDC, these are revered institutions that, whether on paper or on TV, I'm not expecting anybody to come and reduce these institutions. Instead, in our advocacy, we should strengthen them. But however, there are questions that need to be asked, that they are also responsible for the protection of the territorial waters. And ships, okay, crude oil ships, I can tell you, I know your studio very well. Crude oil ships are most times bigger than your studio. So the question will ask, it means these ships into the Nigerian waters, baited for days and took away crude oil and nobody is seeing these things. So the security agencies would also be held to account. But you see, platforms like this is not for us to begin to reduce them, because these are revered institutions that we need to build, as I said. So going forward, we need to begin to ask questions like, what are the problems? How do they work hand in gloves with the locals to ensure that this whole theft around the Niger Delta stops? And secondly, let me also take this. You begin to ask questions like, what is the remuneration of the average security agent guiding this pipeline? I said it in your studio a long time ago. The salary of an average soldier, a private soldier, is about 50,000 naira, plus his grumbling allowances about 70 to 80,000 naira. So for a sergeant, his salary is within the rate of about 100,000 naira. And for you to be a sergeant in the Nigerian Army, maybe you would have served up to 10 to 15 years. So with how many children? So you begin to ask, so what will be the motivation of that soldier that you have deployed to go and protect these pipelines that worth billions of dollars? And his salary is just about that paltry amount. So even the federal government is not innocent of this crime. So in as much as, yes, I have heard reports of complacency and, this, collaborative, or should I say, their hands being in the pot, you understand? But we need to also review the structures. And of course, like I've said, you can't talk about security without the locals. Look at it all over the world now. If you go to America, if you walk into a mall, first the mall gets security. After the mall gets security, the immediate community has security. Counties have security before you talk about police. So bring it down to the Niger Delta. We begin to ask questions like, where is the communities where this oil is found? What's the form of security we have been able to activate? Which is why, okay, this diversification of contracting to us, these people can join the security is also important. So we need to begin to ask this question. Then we also need to begin to ask questions like communal participation. For example, $1 of crude oil may just be selling for about 70 a barrel. So do we ask a question? So communities that have this crude oil going, should we say out of the $70 per barrel, even if it's $1 that is your own, and the community is aware that $1 of every crude oil that passes through them, can we not say that they will join in the protection of that crude oil much more than any other person who is just posted there for 1 or 2 years? Because don't forget, a soldier or a naval officer is posted to a community in the Niger Delta for the first 1 or 2 years. Does not mean he knows the community much as he who was born and raised there. So we need to look at this. So it has to be a robust conversation Okay, an
Right.
unbiased
And
conversation and a conversation that should be approached with an openness of mind.
talking about open conversations and understanding the issues that you have, elaborately, stressed. Abubakar Momoh is there now. He's the new minister of the Niger Delta Affairs Ministry. And how do you think he should navigate arguments of this ministry overlapping unduly with the NDDC? For example, there have been calls that why don't you even scrap the Niger Delta Ministry and allow NDDC, which we see the results, on ground, them accessing remotest, communities that the ministry have never done, that the ministry has never done since it was set up in 2008. How do you think he will navigate, to make his legacy count and to serve out, the mandate of the ministry? What are your thoughts on this?
Now, let me tell you something. Abubakar Momoh, as a minister, has the advantage of attending the Federal Executive Council meeting, which others don't have. Okay? So that in itself is an invaluable asset. Okay, that's number one. Number two, for Abubakar Momoh to succeed, I will recommend. I don't know him much. I have not seen him around the issues of the Niger Delta because, we meet a lot here. But that doesn't mean he won't do a good job. What I would recommend is for him to relocate himself to Niger Delta and meet with stakeholders. You see, one of the problems of the Niger Delta is people sitting down in Abuja and writing reports about the Niger Delta. Niger Delta, they don't know. We call it their drone views. They just take their views from the top without really coming down. So for him to succeed, I will recommend, he has his own ways of doing things. He comes down to the Niger Delta and meet with the stakeholders in all these areas that I discussed with you. Okay? Beyond this, as part of his duty to see the Niger Delta recovery plan, his major duty will be how to recalibrate all these issues and see how he can join them collectively for Mr. President and give him the report and create that supervision over these other related agencies and create a link between these agencies and Mr. President. One of the things he should not do is to leave these supervisory duties over these other components that I discussed about earlier in this program, and begin to chase contracts like his predecessors, and begin to go into the NDDC and see what payment he wants to influence, what contract he wants to have for himself, okay? If he's able to come down to the Niger Delta, discuss with relevant stakeholders. When I'm talking about relevant stakeholders, I'm not talking about coming down to the Niger Delta to meet with ex-militants or ex-agitators. Traditional rulers, opinion leaders, environmentalists, okay? Bankers, prospective investors who can take advantage of the littoral advantages of the Niger Delta to create. Because you see, you can't talk about peace in the Niger Delta without first creating jobs. Right. He must also talk to people who can rebuild.
I'm afraid we have
once again
mindsets. Okay,
right.
These issues of Niger Deltas must walk away from these issues of at the drop of every hat, there is threat. So he needs to begin to walk away from them, to begin to talk to them, to see how they can begin to rebuild
Alfred
peace.
Kenopado, because of our time, and I want you to respond to this in less than a minute, if you can. We just like you said, corruption, mismanagement, have plagued the development effort of the Niger Delta, and then we've got the new minister of the Niger Delta. So, are you optimistic that it will be able to ensure accountability, transparency in allocating resources and implementation of projects very quickly?
He does not even have any resource to allocate. He has a budget less than every other ministry. He only has supervision to allocate. And that depends on his motive. Don't forget that motivation is the key. What is the motive behind him in approaching the Niger Delta? If the motive behind him in approaching the Niger Delta is to give the president the best report and coordinate all those factors to give the Niger Delta the best, it's okay. His resource is like this. It's very small, okay? But His supervisory result and his access to the Federal Executive Council is massive. So he should use that to coordinate the activities of the NDDC, the Ministry of Petroleum, the Ministry of Environment, and other related commissions, including the amnesty, to see how all of them work hand in glove to give the president the best. That is, if his motive is to develop the Niger. But if his motive is to be a minister and see what he can get out of the NDDC,
it is finished, you mean. Former head of reintegration at the Presidential Amnesty Program, Alfred Kemi Pado, thank you very much for speaking with us on TVC Breakfast.
Can I also say something? Just 1 minute.
Quickly, please. We don't even have 1 minute. Can you make it, brief, very brief?
Okay. One of the things he also needs to do is to work hand in glove, okay, with the government in the Niger Delta. I say this because he belongs to an APC government, and most governments in the Niger Delta, like the Rivers, Bayelsa, Akwa Ibom, and whatnot, belong to PDP government. So when he comes down here, he needs to bring all of them together and work for President Mohamed Tinubu, drop a bit of the partisanship. When the election comes, he can take the partisanship. So that's also important, because that's one of the, inter-party rivalry is one of the things that has been hindering them. The smooth work of all these organizations. Just to say this for administration, and I appeal to those in the presidency to take note of this. But we can all succeed together for the president, I tell you.
All right.
Bola Tinubu, you meant to say.
Mr.
Yes,
Pado,
President Bola Tinubu.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much once again for your contributions on the program this morning. Alfred Kemi Pado there speaking about issues before the new Minister of the Niger Delta Affairs Ministry.